Muppets. There's so much maniacal laughter in that movie. Like,
Yeah.
I when I think about that movie, I just think of all these, like, little creatures going,
It's kind of, you know what it reminds me of? Is Army of Darkness.
yeah.
So many scenes in that remind me of Army of Darkness, which is funny because they're very different films in a way, but they're also kind of similar in a lot of ways.
There were moments where I just felt like a kid again. I mean, suddenly I'm transported back to, 5 years old, 6 years old,
Yeah.
and I'm watching this, and so I'm glad you're able to appreciate it, seeing it for the first time as an adult, because
totally.
I can't experience that. Like, I can't watch this film
Without going back
to being a kid again.
They tend to make characters really kind of like super nice and really friendly,
Yeah.
and everybody's in love with each other. And in this film, people are constantly like roughhousing and like playing practical jokes on each other.
And I think
there's fart jokes and there's.
I think Terry Jones, one of the Monty Python guys who wrote the screenplay, has a lot to do with that too. I mean,
Yeah. No,
all
that
these
makes
things that don't really make a whole lot of sense, but they're just totally random and funny anyways. Like it was just a perfect combination of like Jim Henson and Monty Python just put together, and this weird world where things don't make sense. And it was also a fine line that they had the balance on this idea, like, okay, there has to be stakes, like she could die, she could
Right.
fall in the pit of eternal stench,
Yeah.
but at the same time you're never like too frightened. Oh, it's right up here.
I thought it was a kind of an interesting choice at the beginning. I wasn't sure if I was into it. I could see if I was 6, I might be more into it. It definitely felt very 80s. It
Yeah.
had that Lethal Weapon sax going on.
Yeah, the sax. There's so much sax.
Yeah.
It kind of works in Labyrinth because the movie actually does take place in the 80s, and it's just this 80s girl gets transported into this fantasy world. So maybe that makes it more believable.
There we go. So what was your favorite Muppet?
Well, there was the one that said that horribly offensive term to her, which was
That's
a
your
term.
favorite part of the movie.
It only did nothing.
Yeah, this one Muppet, or it wasn't a Muppet, I don't know what the hell it was.
It was an imp thing.
Yeah, it was this little imp. I don't know really how they pulled that off, but
He must have said something else. I think maybe that's what came across.
I think
Why
in
would
the
you say that?
80s there was a lot, it was a lot,
In a kids movie?
homophobia was like in the 80s. It was like cool to say horrible stuff like that.
Just go through the water here. Somebody told me Tom Cruise is in this movie, and I feel like I've heard it twice.
They must have been thinking of Legend.
Legend?
Yeah. Have you seen Legend?
I guess I haven't.
Legend is great. The big puzzle of the two doors.
Yeah.
Do you notice like there was a flaw? I mean, like she asked the right question, yet she fell into the certain death or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that weird? Like,
Well, it was the Labyrinth. Things aren't fair in the Labyrinth.
yeah, I guess so. There is no logic.
Is the Labyrinth a metaphor or an allegory or something for adolescence? Is that what they were going for?
Well, if you want to get,
Oh, I know where you're going with this conversation.
yeah,
That's probably pretty accurate as well. I didn't really have a good sense up until maybe halfway through the film of how close or far away she was to her goal.
it was very episodic. And I think that's probably how it was written. They're like, well, how about we have one scene where this happens and another
Right.
scene where this happens. I'd be really curious to show this movie to a kid and see what they think. I'd love to get like a kid's perspective of this film. Like they watch the Iron Man movies and all this stuff, and then they watch a movie like this to see and just get an idea of how it compares to other movies that are coming out.
I kind of feel like they would really like it for like little things, like things they wouldn't expect. Like I can't remember his name. It wasn't Hodor, it wasn't Hogdor, and nobody else can remember his name anyways. But the main sort of like
Hoggle,
yeah, the helper character, right? The first thing you see of this character is him pissing into a lake. Can you imagine watching like a Pixar film and the first shot of like your secondary characters, some guy taking a leak into the? Like,
I would love that.
I mean, I think kids like would watch that and be like, they would be shocked and like in a happy way. They would think it's hilarious. They think it's funnier than I thought it was, and I thought it was pretty funny.
God, that would have made Up so good.
I thought one of the smart things that they did for kids. For me, it didn't work or not work because it wasn't important to me. But you know, the target audience in this film is kids, so I think it was a really smart move where they had like the first song I think in the picture, like the first musical number, was with David Bowie with the baby.
Yeah.
And like the baby like started off kind of scared, but by the end of it was having kind of a good time. And I think they were probably intentional of like, we don't want to make this too scary for kids. Like we've already had this little child get kidnapped. Like let's show that it's bad, but kind of in a funny way that's not really all that bad.
In the same scene, they're able to pull in adults by having David Bowie hold this staff with a crystal ball at the very end of it, and it looks just like a microphone. Like he's singing while holding this staff, and he's doing his little like David Bowie thing, and he's holding what looks like a microphone. And I think a lot of adults, that's easy for them to just transition to, oh, there's the David Bowie I know, and he's singing about stealing babies. How cute.
Yeah, right. If I'm gonna look for things that maybe weren't so hot in this film, the opening 20 minutes, it felt like George Lucas dialogue, and I don't mean that as a compliment. It was like, I'm going to go into this room now. Walk into the room. Why do you always treat me like a child? We're going to dinner.
We'll be back at midnight. We're leaving you alone with the kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I didn't think about that. So that's one thing like I can finally recognize as a flaw as an adult. Like when you're a kid, that's the last thing you think about.
Yeah.
And as an adult now, I'm like, okay, yeah, there is some still dialogue in the beginning.
I mean, the film has, I think, a lot of flaws, but flaws aren't necessarily bad. Flaws, like when a person has flaws, they're charming. Like a person without flaws is creepy. It's Christian Bale from American Psycho. Like, it's not cool. Like you want a movie to have flaws, and you want a movie to have some imperfections that can give it some sort of character and, I don't know, charm.
Yeah, I mean, with flaws, whenever I see a flaw, I know it's something they at least tried something. Because you don't get a flaw from coverage.
No.
You don't get a flaw from just a camera shooting two people having a conversation over beer. Like you get flaws from actually going out and trying something different. And sometimes you get it and sometimes you don't. And when you notice a flaw, like, yeah, it didn't work, but at least you tried.
Screw it, I'll spoil it. If you haven't seen this film yet, like you should have seen it by now.
Yeah.
Like the idea that like this film is about growing up, but it's not about giving up those childish things. If anybody knows that, it's Jim Henson. It's not about giving up those childish things. It's about welcoming in other things as well. And those childish things will always be there.
Yeah.
And they're important for you to be a whole person.
It's okay to still appreciate these childhood things. Like there's, you can still grow up and still enjoy these imaginary things.
You can like David Bowie in tight pants and Muppets.
Mm-hmm.